My real thing is I like action. There's some prime things that we can put into place in our lives to live a godly life. You can put skills and things into your lives even if you've messed up. Well, welcome to Joan's Party of Two. We are privileged and honored today to have a very good friend, dear friend of ours, Dr. Brian Jenkins, join us. So really, it's Joan's Party of Three today.
Joan's Party of Three. You're welcome to the party.
The third wheel. Here I am.
The third wheel.
Like a bad date in college. Oh, let's bring Brian along. He's not with anybody.
Oh, it's great to have you here, Brian.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
One of the reasons we wanted to take this moment and capture this is to really kind of open up a dialogue as to what we believe and why do we believe it as Christians. There's a lot of deconstructing of the faith conversations. I really kind of want to dive into that a little bit today too, and really kind of go in that direction. But that's the whole point of this conversation, of bringing us all together today.
Yeah, Jenna, I think we've really been wrestling with who's like determining the belief system of our culture. And right now, if we were honest, it's not the home or the church. It's social media. It's TikTok. Influencing the beliefs. And so very excited about having this conversation. Before we jump into it, I do want to remind you to follow us, help us get the word out, share it, like it. It helps us really just get the messaging out. And if you have a question for us, how do they get the question to us?
You can DM us at Jana L. Jones.
On Instagram.
Or
Troy H. Jones on Instagram. That's how you can get the message to us. Should we give your Instagram stuff out?
There's no need.
You don't have Instagram going?
No.
It's okay.
Nothing. Dr. Brian Jenkins, he's in the house.
He is here.
So let's start, guys. Why is it important to even have this conversation, what we believe as Christians? Why is it important?
For me, it's always been, when I really started getting into this topic, I realized that you will only do and act and all those sorts of things. You are a product of what you believe. You're not a product of what you know.
Wow.
You're not a product of what you've learned. You're really, everything in your life is an extension, in my opinion, is an extension of belief. And so if you are uncertain about belief or even unaware of what you actually believe in, then you'll always be in a state of flux and in a state of instability. And so when belief gets eroded, it tends to really compromise every other area of your life.
Yeah, so really the bottom line, you think about this as a parent or as an influencer in someone's life, what we anchor their beliefs in is everything. At the end of the day, where we actually say this is what we believe becomes critical to their outcome.
Yeah, and what are we driving people to believe in? And even us, like you said, as influencers or parents or leaders of any kind, really taking stock and saying, what am I actually telling people to believe in? What am I telling people to trust in? And what am I growing in their life as well? So
now, Jana's way more on social media than you and I.
Well, it wouldn't be hard.
Yeah. So, Jana, what if somebody just kind of looked at Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, what beliefs are people giving out there that they're anchoring their lives in?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversations out there about sexuality. What gender am I, and what am I identifying with? And I think it causes all kinds of confusion from parents. I've talked to a lot of parents, and even on social media, just putting it out there. How do I tell my kids? How do I help my kids really ground themselves in what's the starting point? And I think that's a big one out there.
No, we were talking earlier. It's we really have to go back to the starting point, not where we land, right?
Right.
We usually argue about, help me, we argue like the argument or the discussion, but it's really where do you start in the discussion?
And if we don't start on the same place, we're never going to land in the same place. I think that's a misnomer that a lot of people have.
And
we'll get there eventually.
You've said something recently that we all start with different starting points.
Right.
In our walk with Christ or in our life in general.
Right.
And I think that matters in this conversation too, because you can come to the conversation with your view, I can come with my view, but it doesn't mean we're at the same starting point.
Right. And because if you see it as a worldview issue, which is the worldview is the way that you make sense of your reality, if that worldview is being challenged, that's incredibly disruptive to people. And so that antagonistic conversation, rather than just saying, hey, we don't share this worldview, but we can have this conversation, if I see it as I'm right and you're wrong, now that's a disruptive, antagonistic conversation, and that I think is what leads to a lot of this cycle of outrage and frustration and just
I
noise.
think Christians, we all need to learn that as well.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we approach these conversations and we come with an antagonistic worldview as well. And we're part of the problem.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what we don't realize is that I shouldn't say a true, but I think a strong Christian worldview should actually, if you read what it does in the Bible, it brings you to peace. It brings you to joy with people. It brings you to love and compassion. So the angry, antagonistic, outraged Christian is actually not a biblical evidence of a worldview that's rooted in the Lordship of Christ.
Yeah, that is so powerful. Someone that,
good.
that speaks with hatred and anger. So often we as Christians, that's what people know us for.
Yeah.
It's what we're against versus what we're for.
Right.
And I think I'm thinking about parents and influencers and all of us. We really have to figure out what we're for versus what we're against when it comes to our faith and our belief system. So we're ultimately going to land on this podcast, like, as a Christian, what do we believe? We're going to go there. But a couple just framing the conversation. I think, let me ask this. Where has the church blown in this area? Where is the church and families, mom, dad, where have we blown it in terms of really developing a biblical worldview for our churches and our families?
I mean, if you were to ask me, so from like a church history background, which I have a little bit into, I think it's whenever the church adopts the like the trappings and the plans and the strategies and the powers of the world systems around it, and then sort of uses those to justify the advance of the kingdom of God, that's really where things get very dangerous, because part of the fundamental part of the Christian worldview is absolute trust in the power and the lordship of Jesus Christ. Yeah. And so if the church is coming from a place of fear or panic, that means we're not operating in absolute trust of Jesus, and we're already off at that point.
And sometimes that fear and panic can be birthed out of our own ignorance.
Absolutely.
Of not knowing how to approach a conversation, or it's experiential, right?
Yeah, right.
We've experienced God in this way, this form, and then when someone comes in and tries to challenge that, that's where it all comes in. And so I think it's important that we use our mind and we connect it to our heart. One without the other is problematic.
Yeah, that's why it has to be a worldview and not just a belief or an
feeling.
Idea or a feeling. It has to be all of those things tied together, especially in the areas, let's say biblically, that aren't clear. Because we're always looking, well, what's this verse about? And you're like, man, there's actually not a lot in the Bible about this thing.
Yeah.
So that means that now I'm leaning into the whole worldview. And if I'm immersed in what Jesus taught, then I have a way that can respond in a Jesus way, even when there's not a biblical answer.
Good.
I think the idea of responding with panic and fear is critical, because if we're trying to like parent our kids or pastor the church out of panic and fear, it comes across, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't build this healthy. So if I would say to every parent, we can't panic. We have to put our trust in Jesus and bring some clarity. And this is why conversations like this, how do you bring the clarity? One of the mistakes I think churches make, and I'm going to pick on, you and I are preachers, and Jana's a preacher.
Very good one.
I'm just Jana.
Very good. You're just Jana.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. It's
You're
gone.
Jana plus two.
Here's a mistake I think churches have made. And I wasn't raised in church. I got saved, as a teenager. And I felt like this when I first got saved, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. If you make everything absolute, then nothing's absolute.
Right.
And in the church, it's like we make all of our doctrine like everyone has to agree on the doctrine, instead of having, as we've discussed here, the difference between what I call dogma, the absolute truth, versus just my opinion, or the doctrine of the church. And so if you make everything true, nothing's true. And what happens in the church is we make all of our opinions like, you have to agree with this, and we never get clarity. No, really. As a Christian, there's just fundamental truths we have to believe. We'll talk about this in a moment, that Jesus is Lord. Right. But we make it like you have to agree on my opinion of music, or my opinion of
how you raise your kids,
or if I should have tattoos or no tattoos. So there's Christian. We can laugh at ourselves. Christians that argue about should I drink, not drink. We argue about everything, and I think in the days going forward, we have to be really clear and simple and powerful. This is what we believe. Yeah,
and I think making sure that wherever that belief comes from, it has to sprout. If you were to use my metaphor, it has to sprout from that seed of the lordship of Jesus. Because I can answer those questions,
right?
But 9 times out of 10, I've probably encountered more non-biblical answers to those questions than actual biblical ones. People will just say, well, it's a good answer, a right answer, it feels right, but it's actually not the Bible answer. So anything I'm doing, I'm now outside the Bible on this issue.
Yeah. Right.
And now I'm in dangerous.
Brian,
if I'm outside the Bible, I'm on dangerous ground.
And I think most churches spend their time and energy outside the Bible.
I think that's a real danger, yeah.
Instead of saying no, and so it's like, we spend so much time outside the Bible. Here at New Life, we use a phrase, when the Bible's clear, we'll be clear. But when it's not, we're okay.
Yeah.
And I would say, as a parent, we have to really get our absolutes really clear in our brains, or we confuse a whole generation.
I think when we're unclear as parents, pastors, Christian leaders, when we're unclear in that and we can't be okay with not knowing, we don't have to have all the answers. But I think being able to have the conversation and saying, I don't know, is actually quite freeing because we don't know all the answers. Only God does. And we're just here trying to help one another along. And I think this is a critical conversation to have in our society.
Jenna, I think you're 100% right. To be able to say, I don't know, or the Bible's not clear. However, this is where the Bible's clear. And we'll get to that in a moment. This is where what we do know about Scripture is what we have the anchored in the hearts of people we influence. If you're having a conversation with a neighbor, instead of arguing about all the, can I say stupid things?
Sure.
Silly things. We just say, here's the beginning point, and we really need to focus on that.
Sure.
So the word, there's a buzzword going out right now, and deconstruction of your
the faith.
Yeah.
Somebody tell me what that means. Deconstruction, Jenna. What does that word mean?
Yeah, Pastor
Brian.
Brian.
What does that mean?
Dr. Brian.
We should ask the doctor. Well, I'm the
What
doctor
does that
too.
word mean?
Well,
Yes, you're a
yeah.
doctor.
I'm a doctor, but we got Dr. Jenkins, Dr. Jones, and really
That's right.
Dr. Jenna.
That's right. What are two doctors in a shoebox? A pair of loafers. So.
Deconstruction, what's that mean?
It's really, I mean, it's exactly that. It's taking it apart. The idea that I take my faith apart, I take my faith apart with the hope and the idea that when I put it back again, it's a purer, more direct, or more absolute form. The difficulty is that in the modern deconstructionist movement, you really see a lot of taking apart with no goal to put it back together again. And it goes from deconstruction to destruction. And I think the problem is that
good.
In that panic, churches respond by saying, this thing's horrible, this thing's awful. I think it's awesome to ask these questions. I hope every young adult says, why do I believe what I believe? What is it I really believe? So I think the church has to do a job discipling that process instead of condemning that process.
So what does that look like? What does it look like for a church to disciple someone? Because we have a lot that are going through the process. Maybe you're out there, you're a parent, or you're a pastor of a church, or you're a leader of a church, and there's someone going through the deconstructing of their faith. What would be some good tools that we could put in their hands to help disciple someone through that process?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is really make sure you're ready to trust God. Like, do I trust God with this person? We're all parents. Do I really trust God? I said I did. I dedicated them. There's a preacher there and everything. But now that they've come to it, do I really do that? I think the other thing is this whole idea. So all my work is in what's called the simple seed. It's this idea of getting Christianity and what is it that Christians really believe into the simplest form possible. And then understanding that you are just planting that. I'm not uprooting. You've done lots of landscaping and remodels where you uproot a tree. Uprooted trees are always in danger of dying because they're in a foreign soil. They didn't grow there. They don't belong there. Versus planting a seed and letting it grow in the soil of that young person or that kid's experience. We have to remember that the Bible, in terms of what it actually teaches, really doesn't demand that we agree to a lot. So when we start adding all this other stuff, I think that's, and so getting them down to saying, look,
what is the root system?
What is this? Do you disagree with this statement? Well, probably not. And I think the other side of it then would be the power of questions. What about Christianity? Not about the church, not about what mom and dad did growing up. I realize we made mistakes. What is it about Christianity that really troubles you? And again, 9 times out of 10, it will be an experience they had with a Christian and not the actual truth of Jesus. So if we're trying to we have to get people back to the truth of Jesus. No one really has a problem with love your neighbor as yourself.
No, it's good. And I think you hit on something so powerful, that asking a really good question versus having the answers, but being willing to sit down with somebody, not in panic and not in fear, but in sheer just, let's open up the conversation and ask a good question. What troubles you about that? I think is pivotal in discipling someone as they're trying to reconstruct what their future looks like. I think that's big.
What's interesting, Janet, we as Christians, we're used to giving answers, not asking questions.
It's so true.
And you think about, I don't have the stat before me, but how many questions? Jesus asks questions all the time.
Yeah, parables.
Yeah, parables, questions, and we like to give answers.
Yeah.
And I think as an influencer in Christian faith, we have to learn to start asking questions and bringing it back to the main thing.
Yeah, I think especially as parents, parents discipling children, because that's one of your jobs.
Yeah.
And to help them understand this is what we as a family believe.
Sure.
And again, I always say, I don't know, but I believe.
Yeah.
I don't know, but here's what I believe. And separating those two things, I think, is often beneficial.
So in a moment, we're going to real clear on this podcast define in simple clarity what we believe as Christians. We're going to do that. But Jenny, you asked about resources. One of the resources, and I know we have Dr. Jenkins here, I'm just going to say this, is that on our website we have 4 sessions that lay out what we call theology one day and what we believe as Christians. 4 sessions. I'd encourage you to go look at it.
Yep.
And maybe even if your kids are at the age, I'm not sure what that age is. Sometimes I think younger the better.
Absolutely.
Like I think Kingston at the age 8 can handle
Sure.
this. But listening to it, Brian does a phenomenal job in 4 sessions talking about what we believe, and he breaks it down. So that's a resource I think is very, very helpful. So we're going to talk about what we believe in a moment, but I want to ask one more question before we get there. I think there is a difference I want to talk about between what I believe as an American versus what I believe as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people make them the same.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just...
Well, Americans do.
Yes, Americans do. Very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. So let's talk about, it's just different. Like what I believe as American versus what I believe as a Christian. Why is that important to kind of dissect that and get those as two different categories?
I think one of the most difficult things that we have to remember is that when we choose to become a Christian, we choose that the kingdom of God is primary above all else in our lives. And there are things in the kingdom of God that aren't always going to be in line with American ideals or American dreams. One of them is self-sacrifice. Now, that's an ideal. We have people who sacrifice. But I'm talking about the idea of deference of my rights for the benefit of others. And that, as an American, all I have is my rights. As a Christian, I'm called to give everything away, and that may be including rights to certain things. My right to be angry, my right to not to forget. Like I can hold on to this stuff. And that's, I think, one of the biggest elements is we sort of say, well, my rights as an American, because we say they're inalienable, endowed on us by our Creator. So we assume that they're the same thing. And biblically, that's a bit of a
as Americans,
stretch.
we believe that. And I'm an American. I'm proud.
Yeah, I am too.
But the truth is, as a Christian,
just in case anyone's ever wondered. I know people have questions about Crazy Brian, but
But Christians, what we believe is that we're servants. We believe that, Paul said, why not rather be wrong? Why not rather be cheated? We believe something different. And we confuse those two things. And I just think churches have spun out of control. I think we've spent our generations out of control because we treat like the Bible and the Constitution is the same.
Yeah, as inspired almost. And you see that. When I did some work on worldviews, there are whole movements of Christian churches that believe that the Constitution is as inspired as Scripture, as the biblical text. And these are churches that exist and are out there, and that could be troublesome in some respects. I'm trying to be as respectful as possible, but I just think that that's where we tend to deviate from what Christ has called us to do. In the earliest forms of Christianity, they were very suspect because they wouldn't fight for Rome. They wouldn't go along with what Rome wanted. They didn't do a lot. And so everyone in Rome was like, we don't know that we can trust you because you're not acting like the rest of us. Yeah. And, that's always a challenge for the kingdom.
I bring it up because I think it's important as developing a good biblical worldview is based upon the Bible, the Word of God, not what land I raise in or where I pledge allegiance to Christ first. My allegiance belongs to Him. Yeah. And I'm American and proud American, but I have to understand that is not the same thing as being a Christian. So dissecting that is probably bigger than we have time right now, but I think it's critical.
And that is, when you talk to deconstructionists, that tends to be one of the big pushing points, is that I feel like Christianity is more about being an American than it is
Right.
being a Christian. And they
Right.
can even recognize the discrepancy, and that
Sure.
challenges a lot of people who are
And
questioning
it's not
faith.
necessarily about a political party.
No, not necessarily.
Per
It's
se,
just
but where
it's
our
these
allegiance
ideals,
is
these
to the Lord.
ideologies.
Yes, to the Lord first.
Absolutely.
That filters in, and I think is scriptures that just come into play. If you want to be great in God's kingdom,
Yes.
you have to learn to be the servant of all. Where in our society, that's totally flipped upside down. Do what's best for you. Go for the best.
Yeah.
Get
Go
the
get
goal.
yours,
Do
whatever
what
it takes.
you're
Yeah,
entitled
yeah,
to,
yeah.
and you have your opinion. And God's is completely opposite of the world, I
Yeah.
think. And
Jenna, because we
Absolutely.
like to recommend books here and there. I would highly recommend Andy Stanley's new book, Not In It to Win It.
Mm-hmm.
Phenomenal book. I don't agree with all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Andy Stanley phenomenal book. I'll just say that. It talks about this whole idea of what does it mean to be a real Bible church, a gospel church in America today. In the last 30 months, it's been particularly crazy going on around us. I would highly recommend that book. Okay, let's get down. What does a Christian believe? Brian, the most simple phrase as you can, and this is what you've given your doctoral study too.
Yeah.
What do Christians believe?
Christians believe that Jesus is Lord, that the Lordship of Jesus Christ is the root system. It's the root. So if you want to think of Christianity as a seed, a basic seed is always made up of a root, a stem, and a leaf. All seeds have them. So the root is the Lordship of Jesus Christ, that above all things, he's in charge and I'm not. And when I say he's Lord, he's not just in charge, he's the king of the universe. So there's that divine. So if you want to think of that as the root system, everything in my life filters through that and then is expressed. So as that grows, that's what takes us into doctrine. And my work has been in creedalism, which the ancient church used creeds all the time to teach people. They really didn't teach the Bible. They taught the creeds, and then they would teach the Bible through the creeds. So in my work, I said, well, if we had a creed now, what would it be? And so that would be that fourfold thing of God made it. God is the loving, benevolent creator of the universe. We broke it, that through sin, man lives in open defiance to God. Jesus fixes it, and Jesus is the only way to repair the rift between God and man, and that the church shares it, and that the church is the people of God on earth bringing reconciliation. That's what the church believes. You should be able to drop that in any context in the world. So if somebody says, well, what do I need to believe to be a Christian? Jesus is Lord. That's it.
That's
And
good.
then on that, we do believe that there's a loving divine creator in for that. And then, so if that's the stem, and then the bloom or the fruit or the flower, if you will, that's love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the ultimate ethical expressions of Christianity.
Again, I hope every person just stops and listens about the last 3 minutes of Dr. Jenkins. Phenomenal. Because I think we so complicate it. We have to just simplify it.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is Lord. It starts there.
Yeah.
He's not just a good teacher.
No.
He's not just a great prophet. He is Lord. And I think there's a lot of people that go to churches and they just kind of add Jesus on.
Mm-hmm.
You can't add Jesus. He is Lord, and it has to start there. Instead of arguing about all these other issues, that's the starting point of Christianity.
Yeah, and that's one of the struggles, because you don't elect Jesus. You don't vote on Jesus. He's a king who invites you into his kingdom.
Wow.
And we should be humbled and honored to be brought in.
Right.
Not like, oh, aren't you Jesus? Aren't you glad?
Right.
Now, he's very glad we pick him.
Right.
He's very glad we choose him. But ultimately, we go into his kingdom. We don't
Right.
bring him into our kingdom.
Right. And when we bow our knee to the Lordship of Jesus Christ, it's a privilege to do the things he's asked me to do. It's
Exactly.
an honor to, I hate to say this, but to lay my anger down, to say, okay, I'm going to lay this at the...
It's scary to say out loud.
It's scary
Yeah, it
to
really
say
is,
out
yeah.
loud. It's like, it sounds very odd to say, but when we're in the King's presence, really does anything else matter?
My right to be bitter about this situation. I am absolutely, and you know what? You want to tell people you are right. Yes,
Yeah.
you have every right to be angry about this situation.
Right.
But as a Christian, we
Yeah.
chose to lay that anger
Yeah.
down because our King commands us to do it.
That's
And
right.
that's where the conflict comes in.
Yep.
And yeah, it's
So
it's not easy. I mean,
No.
it's like simple but not easy. if that
No,
makes
which
sense.
is what
Yeah.
we do. It's simple but not easy.
Yeah.
But I think it's critical that as we help people deconstruct their faith and rebuild it, we need to build it on this reality that Jesus is Lord. Again, not a prophet, not a good teacher. He is Lord. Let's think about for a moment, guys, about that young adult, maybe freshman year, college, university somewhere. What would you say to that young adult as they're building their worldview and they're trying to come to grips with the fact that Jesus is Lord? How do you even navigate that?
Yeah, I think for me it always starts with, well, so I think it's better to talk about how you think or feel about situations than what you know or believe. Okay? there's a huge gap between what we know and we believe. And actually that gap is very hard to penetrate. The only way you can bridge or you can connect what you know and believe is by how you think about things and how you feel about things, how you experience them. So rather than saying, do you believe in God? A question may be, Mom and I believe that Jesus loves us. What do you think about that? Not do you believe it, but how do you think? So really engaging people in what they think and they feel, and then letting those process. Because, surely we can, and even in debate as Christians, well, surely we can believe Jesus is Lord. Mm-hmm. Surely we can believe that God is the creator of the universe. In whatever different ways we think he created it, we believe that. And you're working to find those common bridges of what people believe to be true.
And that is it, Pastor Brian, that's a skill that I think most leaders and parents neglect. Because we want to tell people, I want to tell you how it's supposed to be versus approaching it from a completely upside down approach. Like, this is what we believe. How do you feel about that? Versus inviting other people into the conversation and taking away the tension point of declaring versus, hey, let's decide this together. Let's talk about this together.
Yeah, Kierkegaard, the philosopher Kierkegaard talks about the difference between being a witness and being a teacher. And he says that the witness is always more effective. And I'm not teaching you anything. I'm just saying, look, this is what I saw.
This is what's changed my life.
This is what's changed my life. And that goes back to John 9. It goes back to Luke 4. It just goes back to the come and see a man who told me everything I have done. John 9, whether he's a demon or not, I don't know. All I know is I once was blind and now I see. So this idea that the truth of our stories is a way, and I think rather than imposing that, we have to think about things about sharing that with people, inviting people into our truth, rather than sort of imposing that truth, which is hard when you're a parent because that's all you want to do. You just want to grab them, you say, hey, listen to me.
But the difference between a witness and a teacher, it's interesting that Jesus has changed my life. And when you're discussing it, even if they disagree with that premise of that Jesus can change your life, but he's changed my life. This is my story. And people are not going to argue with your story, but they may argue with your theology.
And that's okay, and letting that sort of be okay. And I think it's one of those things, Jenny, you and I have had conversations multiple times about old ancient things that we just love. Because they worked. And I think testimony is one of those. The story, the power of our story, testimony time, sharing our story.
Most people will not argue that because it's your story. So most people aren't going to push back on that. The problem we have is a lot of us get stuck in, there's not a lot of new stories to tell because we're stuck in our old, and God has become stagnant. He's become. We've walked through some things.
I'm glad that happened to you 40 years ago or 50 years ago.
But where's the realness of God today in the world that we're living in? And how are we walking out our faith when it's really hard for us? And we are tempted to say things or do things. And I think that we got to have our story, and that's where our connection to the Lord is essential every single day, because that should change the way that we respond in our world.
For sure.
So again, I just want to, in the most simple, and I would encourage people to go watch the 4 sessions of theology one day, but Jesus is Lord. And from there, it's anchored in just 4 different anchor points. Is that a good way to word this?
It's sort of, if you think of a tree, this is the trunk. This is what's holding everything up. So out of the truth that Jesus is Lord grows this powerful, strong trunk that you can really hang anything on. And that is, God made it, we broke it, Jesus fixes it, and the church shares it.
And I wanted to stop there, pause there, for those of you that are you want to write things down. Like you want to get that, write that down. Jesus is Lord. And then from there, God made it. That's what we believe as a church. We believe that we broke it, that we are sinners, and we need the grace of God, that Jesus is the only answer. He's the one that fixed it on the cross, and now we as a church share it. So God made it, we broke it, Jesus fixed it, and now we share it. At the very heart of what Christians believe is that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that it is evidence, the fruit of that is loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and loving your neighbor as yourself.
That's
good. So that's fruit.
And you're from, you're from Idaho, so you've been in farm.
That's right.
That's what attracts the bees. Is the blooms and the flowers and the pollen. So things are spread.
Interesting.
These crops are spread. That's where the metaphor sort of holds up. These crops are spread by the fruit of them. The seed goes on because it's attractive to a bird, or we eat an orange and throw the seeds out. And that's how you propagate that. So the reason our faith doesn't propagate is because of unattractive fruit.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's
That's a big one.
That's episode 2.
That's
Sorry,
rotten.
I didn't mean to.
That's
sorry,
rotten.
just
It's
gotta
true.
plop that on the ground there.
Dun, dun, dun.
It's true.
Good night, everybody.
People see us and we get in the way of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our fruit,
Yeah.
how we treat one another, I think it's more in our, I'm convinced it's more in our attitude than in what we say. I think Christians lack humility. We get on our soapbox and we actually turn people away from the truth because of our fruit that's not showing the grace of God.
Yeah. Yeah. And Paul says this is what our fruit is: love, joy, peace, patience. He tells us. It's so funny because we complicate this, but it's all really laid out. And if you're not this, then I need to question. I've got stinky fruit. I haven't really taken this too far. So we developed this
Where are
part
we
of the
going with
writing.
this one?
Yeah. So stinky fruit.
So again, let's
My book coming out this fall. Stinky fruit.
Oh, that'll sell.
one piece of advice that you would give to either young adults or mom, dad, grandparents, just one piece of advice. And if you're an influencer of any kind, what would you say as it relates to this conversation? One piece of concrete advice.
Go ahead.
Okay, for me, it's I'll steal from Douglas Adams and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't panic.
It's good.
I'll give you a biblical version of that. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. So parents, just trust in God, love your kids, walk with them, be patient. Who they are today, as we all know, is not who they will be tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's right.
No matter even if they think they will be.
That's true.
So they're going to come, they say, I'm this. And you're like, well, let's not decide that today. Let's go
Very
to Dairy
good.
Queen. Like, just don't panic.
Very good.
And I think, and really letting God do the work,
It's good.
Yeah. My piece of advice would be live it out yourself.
Yeah.
You can say something and you can live something, and it can be two different things. And so say what you mean what you say, live it out. And when we're anchored in that, and I echo that as well, when our kids and when people come and share stuff with us that kind of make us go, don't just stay firm in that. And
That's good.
again, that seed planted in the ground, we trust God in that. And either you trust him or you don't.
Yep.
There's no in between here.
That may be the most commonly said phrase in our home
It's
from time to time.
true.
Look, we either trust God or we don't.
Yeah.
And it is an absolute binary
You don't know
state,
when
yeah.
you're going to trust God till you need to trust him.
Exactly. That's what trusting is.
That's what it is. And
Yeah.
so when you hit that point and your son or daughter comes and tells you something that rocks your world, you stay planted and you stay firm in that and you trust God in the story that he's writing, and he's writing the story. You're not. You're a manager of your children. You're a manager of that, and you do your part, but God is the one that ultimately will take care of it.
Absolutely.
There we are, Joel's party of 3.
All right.
All right.
Brian,
Here we
you're
are.
awesome. You're a good date. Is that the
Come
right
on.
way?
I'm not
now
going
you're
to
making
say.
it weird.
I'm not
No,
going
it just really went weird real quick.
We're just
That was
friends.
weird.
Oh, no, it's
Okay, we're
weird.
done.
We're done. All right, we'll see you next
All right.
week.
See you next week.